Avid cross-country skier, and I feel like I won the lottery. I'm going to be spending all weekend skiing. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We are here to talk about a United DFL agenda for the legislative session. And while we've had some fun in the last couple of days talking about the hashtag LFG and us being really ready to go, we truly are moving swiftly, more swiftly than I can remember in my 18 years of service, because that's what Minnesotans expect and deserve. Although there were some bipartisan successes over the last 4 years, I had a really strong and effective partnership with Majority Leader Paul Gazelka. Many of Minnesotans' most important priorities were blocked by the Republican-led Senate. The House would pass fantastic bills only to run into the brick wall of a Republican-led Minnesota Senate. We've had a strong partner with Governor Walz over the last 4 years, and now we are so excited to have a trifecta and Majority Leader Kari Dziedzic leading the Minnesota Senate. We're aligned on our values and our priorities, and we're ready to work hard and work quickly to meet the needs of Minnesotans. We're ready to build a state that works better for everyone. The bills you'll hear us talk about today are not all of our priorities. They are a representative sample of many of the priorities we'll be pursuing this session together. And the bills that will be introduced today are a starting point. Many others are still at the revisor and with teams of legislators working on the final details. As we have frequently discussed, the Protect Reproductive Options Act, or PRO Act, is a top priority for the House and the Senate, and it will be House File Number 1 and Senate File Number 1. Minnesotans have been loud and clear that they want legal protection for their reproductive freedom and their bodily autonomy. We will ensure that Minnesotans are legally entitled to make their own decisions about their health care. We're also determined to improve the economic security for Minnesotans. And one of the ways that we will move this objective forward is by passing paid family and medical leave into law. Everyone deserves the time to take off when somebody is sick in their family or if they need the time to take care of themselves. Too often we're seeing people take time out of the workforce or leave the workforce altogether. And you know we have a workforce shortage, a slight decrease in the labor workforce participation rate over the pandemic. One of the ways we can get more workers back into the workforce is to make sure that everyone has paid family and medical leave. Finally, in this election, Minnesotans were loud and clear that they are tired of extreme rhetoric, divisive politics, even the violent rhetoric that would seek to undermine our democracy itself. Democracy works best when everyone participates, and you will see DFLers in the legislature, in the governor's office, as you heard in the governor's inaugural ceremony, advocating for more voter engagement and more involvement. We're very proud to have led, almost always number one in the country in voter participation, but we are going to work to even strengthen that record by making it easier for 16 and 17-year-olds to pre-register. We are also looking at automatic voter registration and restoring the vote for those who have paid their debt to society. Our state is in a strong position to address big challenges, and we are here to address the needs of the people of Minnesota. I hope and I expect that we are going to make significant progress for Minnesotans this session. And now I'm happy to turn it over to my partner in the Senate, Senator Kari Dziedzic.
Thank you, Speaker Hortman. As she said, I'm Majority Leader Kari Dziedzic, and I'm excited to join the Speaker and the House Majority Leader Jamie Long here today to lay out our shared priorities that we know will move Minnesota forward during this session. How do we know these priorities will move Minnesota forward? Because we listen to Minnesotans. In the past year, Senate DFLers knocked on over 500,000 doors, and we heard from people across the state who told us clearly that they are tired of gridlock and inaction. They elected a new Senate DFL majority to get things done, and we plan to do that by working with the House and the governor. Minnesotans told us they want an economy that works for everybody. They want their rights protected, their freedoms expanded, and democracy defended. They also want us to help lower costs where we can so they can afford their lives. And they want safe communities, quality childcare in schools, and a healthy climate. As the Speaker pointed out, we are aligned on our values and our priorities, and we are ready to act. Like the House, the Senate will move quickly on the PRO Act, on paid family leave, and to protect democracy. After hearing from parents and school districts across the state, we'll also move to help schools and students by funding special education and related services so that kids on individual education plans can thrive. That will help the kids, the schools, and the local communities. We also know that virtually every community across the state is having a shortage of affordable childcare and housing, and that impacts the well-being of children and families. It stops parents from pursuing jobs, and it prevents small businesses from attracting workers. We'll work to make both of those more affordable for families, and that will help families, businesses, and those local communities. And since we heard about the impact of rising prices on family budgets, we'll push to lower costs and help Minnesotans afford their lives by moving to put protections in place to prevent the type of price gouging that we saw during the pandemic and in natural disasters. In short, our priorities are Minnesotans' priorities. It's what the people across the state told us they want us to do. And we plan to do that. We are going to get things done to improve Minnesota. And now I'm going to turn it over to the House Majority Leader, Jamie Long.
Thank you so much, Majority Leader Dziedzic and Speaker Hortman. So you heard some of our shared priorities, and I'm going to talk about two more, those being climate change and childcare. We heard loud and clear from voters in this last election that climate change was one of their top priorities. It polled as a top 5 priority for Minnesotans and why they were showing up to the polls and choosing the candidates that they did. And it's no surprise because we've seen the impacts of climate change here in Minnesota more than almost any other state in the country. And so folks are asking us to move quicker towards cleaner energy that's going to be healthier for us and is going to create really good jobs here in Minnesota. So one of the shared priorities that we are going to be moving forward in the House and the Senate is 100% clean energy by 2040. That was a bill that's passed the House and that Governor Walz has been a big, strong supporter of as well. And on childcare, I happen to be the father of 2 young kids, a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 4-year-old. And today, we have no childcare, and so my wife luckily has a job where she can be flexible and stay home with our 4-year-old so that I'm able to be here today for our floor session and our Rules Committee hearing. But not every family has that. There are a lot of single-parent households and a lot of jobs that aren't as flexible as mine or my wife's. And that's one of the big reasons why we are seeing childcare be one of the #1 cited reasons that people aren't coming back to the workforce and to that workforce participation challenge, labor shortage that Speaker Hortman talked about. Childcare is one of those top things that we can address to try to make sure that we're getting people back to work and helping our employers find new employees. We also in Minnesota have some of the most expensive childcare in the country. When you're looking at pre-K, it actually is the most expensive in the country. And that means that a lot of families aren't able to afford it. It is the same, and I know as a young parent of young kids, the same to put a kid into childcare as it is to put a kid into the University of Minnesota for full-time tuition in the state of Minnesota. And we're asking families to do that when they have a lot less earning in their careers at that point. So we are going to include in our shared priorities the Great Start Child Care Tax Credit, which is a $3,000 tax credit for families with children 5 years old or younger, $3,000 per child with a cap of $7,500. So that will make a real impact in people's pocketbooks and their ability to get to work to help make sure that we're getting that job market turning again. And you've heard, I think, from Speaker Hortman and Majority Leader Dziedzic about our shared priorities, but these should not be a surprise to anyone. These are priorities that we have been putting forward for years because we have been listening to what Minnesotans have asked us to do. We had a joint effort called the Minnesota Values Project where we worked hand in hand with the House and the Senate and went out and did listening sessions in Minnesota years ago and heard these priorities from folks. We've introduced them in bills. We passed many of them through the House. We ran on them in the last election, and Minnesotans have rewarded us with now majorities in both House and are asking us to deliver, and we will deliver. And so with that, we'll open it up for questions.
Can I ask about public safety? That was one of the frustrations I think you had when you were dealing with the Senate Republicans. That's gone away. what might a public safety package look like now that it couldn't look like a year ago?
Well, I can speak to one bill that we have in common in the early introductions, which is giving Attorney General Keith Ellison the very small amount of money that he would like to prosecute more violent crime in greater Minnesota. He has, and his office has a very successful record of helping prosecutors across the state in prosecuting violent crime. The county attorneys want more help from the Attorney General's office, especially for those less populated counties. And the Attorney General is up for the job. So I imagine that funding will move very quickly. Then we have a couple of other proposals. I'll let Senator Dziedzic talk about their catalytic converter theft proposal. But in the House, we have another proposal to invest in public safety by putting money into crime prevention. Cedric Frazier has been really a strong spokesperson on doing what works. We know we need to give more resources to the BCA to process evidence, so we need, on the crime fighting and the enforcement side, additional investment, but we also need investment on the crime prevention side.
Thank you. I think the bill that Speaker Hortman just mentioned on the crime prevention, I think we will find broad support for that in at least the Senate DFL. And then we also heard from Minnesotans. I know I worked with Senator Marty on the catalytic converter bill for the last 2 years because we heard from, I know in my district it was happening a lot. I know Senator Marty and I share a border, and there was a lot going on that border where there was a lot of, and it didn't just impact the cars. They were breaking into a hardware store to steal stuff to actually do the converter thefts. And so we believe that helps Minnesotans. If your catalytic converter is taken from your car, ripped out from your car, it's, costs thousands of dollars to fix. So we think that will help families. So we are going to be moving forward on a variety of different proposals.
Anything along the lines that the governor proposed $300 million in funding to local governments to do what they think is necessary?
We had that as amendment. The Senate DFL put that as amendment last year, public safety, local government aid. And so we are having that discussion on that bill as well.
And the House conferees were essentially there with the Senate. If the Senate Republicans in May of 2022 would have been willing to pass the agreements that we had reached, that would have largely become law last May.
Why is marijuana legalization not among your priorities to move forward?
It is a priority. It is a very big, complicated issue, and we will be having a press conference tomorrow to dive into that more deeply. It is a criminal justice reform issue. It is critically important that Minnesota right some of the wrongs that have been inflicted on our population because of our prohibition policy. But Representative Zach Stevenson will be the chief author on that, and my understanding is that press conference will be tomorrow. And then those who are most versed in the various complex issues will be there to answer questions.
Can any of you speak to which of these priorities can move in January? It seems as though that the abortion rights bill will be one of the first, but can you speak to that?
The PRO Act will be moving quickly. There's some other bills, tax conformity. We're having a discussion. I know the Senate is hearing that tomorrow. So there are other bills that may or may not be on the list. All bills will have numbers. We're going to hear a lot of bills this year. We are taking a look and talking with the speaker in which of these bills maybe just requires one committee that a bunch of us are familiar with, and so can we move those? So we're going to be looking at, we don't want to wait to pass everything at the end of May. We are going to be looking at what can move quickly, where we have agreement, and move them out so that, to show Minnesotans, we heard what they said. We know they're tired of gridlock, they're tired of inaction, and we're excited to be here today to get to work for Minnesota, and we are ready to get to work.
Senator, did you say that paid family and medical leave will move quickly in the Senate, and will that be using cash from the surplus to start?
I said the PRO Act will move quickly. Tax conformity is going to be heard shortly. The paid family leave bill is going to require a lot of committees, and so that will move through, and we'll have good discussions in those committees, and we'll let the process work. But I don't know, similar to marijuana, it is going to be in a lot of committees, and so it will be moving. I don't know how fast it will be moving.
You guys mentioned tackling the climate crisis and reducing carbon emissions. Could we see projects like the Northern Lights Express and or the other clean transportation projects finally see priority?
Absolutely. So Transportation is the #1 source of carbon emissions in the state. We've done a really good job so far at trying to reduce the emissions from our utility sector and from the power sector. If we're able to get to 100% clean energy by 2040, as we're proposing, that's going to make it a lot easier to reduce carbon in the transportation sector as we're electrifying transportation there. But transit is a really important part of that, and I know that Chair Hornstein is rearing to go on making sure that we have robust transit investments in the House, and I'm sure Senator Dibble, both of whom happen to be my Senate district counterparts, are going to be pushing really hard on making sure we have strong transit in the Senate, which is not just a mobility issue, but a climate issue too.
Can you give us a little bit more detail on the child care tax credit that you mentioned? Is that going to be the main tax relief that your caucuses are going to be putting forward this session?
Well, the hopper just opened today, so there'll be lots of things thrown in, and I'm so pleased that the governor has hired Revenue Commissioner Paul Marquardt. He is a brilliant tax policy analyst, and Aisha Gomez is also brilliant. Ann Rest has decades of experience. I am really confident that the governor, under the governor's leadership, his revenue commissioner and our tax chairs will look at all the ideas that are out there and put together a package that everybody can feel great about. Right now, we're starting in lots of different places, right? We have some Democrats and some Republicans who want to do the Social Security tax exemption. We know that has exploding tails, meaning it's very expensive in the future. If we're going to do something like that, we need to know what happens in future years to our investments in things like public schools. So we'll very carefully consider that proposal. It is in the mix, but the child tax credit is in the mix. And I think we share the goal of having a progressive tax code that provides help to the people who need it the most. And the governor was very inspiring in his inaugural ceremony talking about ending child poverty in Minnesota. And with the projected surplus that we have and the brilliant tax policy experts we have working in that area, I think in the tax bill, you will see us make substantial progress towards that goal.
Are you anticipating a bonding bill this year?
I am. Senator Pappas and Representative Fu Lee, who are the chairs of bonding, I know they are excited to pass the bonding bill. I have talked to Senator Pappas in the past and recently, where both of us are frustrated that stuff wasn't passed in May because we look at how interest rates have changed since May and how those projects, they're getting further behind and then they are going to cost more money, and other projects are in the queue. And this is about preserving Minnesota's, it's not just about preserving Minnesota's infrastructure, which it does, but it's preserving Minnesota's history and helping making lives easier and helping invest in communities across the state. So we are excited that we are working on a bonding bill.
And I'm happy for us to have a bipartisan package, and we should have a bipartisan package. But in the past years, we have seen Republicans kind of function as Lucy with the football. And we're a little bit, as Democrats, in the majority in the House, and Governor Walz, we were Charlie Brown. And I'm not handing Lucy the football again. If necessary, we can do a cash bonding bill without Republican participation. This trifecta will not allow Republicans to be an obstacle to doing the work for the people of Minnesota. Now, having said that, there are a lot of great Republicans that we have strong collaborative relationships with. And I'm very excited about the new leadership in both the House and the Senate. And I think you will see this team working very hard to have collaborative success in the bonding area. But we will get the job done one way or another.
The art of listening. The art of listening. What have you learned over the years, whether it be from your party, the other party, or constituents, or, people that come here to talk to you?
Is that for me? I'll go first. I'm sure we all have an answer on that. None of us is as smart as all of us. Mark Dayton spent 8 years saying that. And when I first became our caucus leader in 2017, I thought, oh no, now I have to have all the answers. And no, you just need to know who to ask for advice. And we have focused on asking Minnesotans. In 2017 and 2018, as the new majority leader in the House has said, we went out and had town hall meetings all across Minnesota. We went with a completely open slate and said, let's have a new conversation about public policy in Minnesota. And we have continued that work, and our members continue that work. Every day that constituents take the time to email us, to go to a town hall meeting, to give us a phone call, they help us become better leaders. So the act of governing is all about listening.
I'll agree the act of governing is all about listening. We were just talking in our caucus yesterday and reminding people to start setting up the town halls to have those discussions. As I said earlier, we door knocked over 500,000 doors during the campaign season, and we heard Minnesotans. We listened to them and we heard them, and that's why we're ready to get to work and we're excited to get to work. It is about listening to what they're having to say, and I can honestly say I have listened to my constituents and actually offered bills and passed legislation that they brought to my attention. And so listening helps. When we listen to Minnesotans, it helps the process, and that's why we want to have transparent committee hearings, and we want Minnesotans to be at the table to hear what they have to say, because we are going to be listening and we are going to be taking action.
No, go ahead.
Can you talk a little bit more about the voting-related changes that you're putting forward and how you came to those?
Yes, I think you're going to want to talk to Representative Emma Greenman, and the Senate author is? Lindsay Port. About the entire package. So in House File 3, we have a large package, and there are many different provisions in that package. One of the most important is a bill that I know Senator Champion and I believe Representative Frazier will be carrying, Restore the Vote. And that simply increases voter participation by allowing those who've paid their debt to society to rejoin the voting population. Another very successful measure that's passed in other states that have had the Democratic trifecta, whether it's Washington State or Virginia, is automatic voter registration and allowing 16 and 17-year-olds to pre-register so that when they turn 18, that they are legally entitled to vote.
Can I follow up on that, maybe with Representative Long? So does the Chief Justice call you up and say, you do it? Because we've been waiting for 13, going on 14 months for a Supreme Court case on Restore the Vote. And I can't find anyone who can tell me cases have sat there longer than that. So might you be working on this, and then in the middle of session, they decide to release a decision on that case?
I know it's a complicated issue for the Supreme Court, and they have certainly taken their time on the decision. But I think that our job as legislators is to put forward what we think is right. I don't know if the court is going to adjust their decision-making timing based on us being in session or not. I certainly can't speak for the court. But I think that you'll find strong support in both chambers for restoring the right to vote. I carried a bill last session on probation reform because we had some of the longest probation terms in the entire country, 40 years, 25 years, 30 years. And that means that individuals who committed crimes in their 20s often aren't able to vote until they're in their 60s or 70s. And that's just absurd. So the lead plaintiff in that case that you mentioned was an individual who testified in committee on my bill. And so I think that there is a real element of compassion to letting individuals participate in the process who are out, who are functioning in our society, who are working, who have turned their lives around, but yet don't feel like they can be full citizens because they're denied this really fundamental right.
Is there any legislation specific to northern Minnesota that you guys could see being a priority and pushing through in this particular session?
Yes, so Senator Hochschild has introduced a bill, or will be introducing a bill on the unemployment insurance, workers' comp, I think it's unemployment insurance for the miners up north. I believe he will also be the author. I believe he will be the author of the child care tax credit because child care, he's a parent of young kids, and child care is a big issue in northern Minnesota and the unemployment issues in northern Minnesota. We'll also be talking a lot about housing. We have heard, as a lead on the housing committee the last few years, we have heard from cities across the state that is impacting. We've heard from cities and the businesses in those cities that the lack of affordable housing is impacting their economy, and they have jobs, but they have no place for people to live in. And so housing is another issue that is across the state. It's not just a metro issue. It is a crisis across the state. So there's a variety of issues that we will be working on that impact northern Minnesota and all across the state. Price gouging, we are one of the few states that don't have a statute that says you can't price gouge. And so that's another one that's going to impact people across the state.
We just got a question from the Star Tribune about sports betting. Does anyone want to speak to that?
I'm sure that Representative Stevenson will have a press conference on that soon. I will just say that you can look at last year's record. We had, I believe, somewhere between 7 and 10 hearings in the House. We worked consistently over time with all of the interested parties. The Senate Republicans threw a hearing together 3 days before session adjourned, as though to represent that they cared. But if they cared, they would have done the work during the session. Anyway, so that's a kind of a conversation for another day, but I believe that we will be making progress on the issue this year.
Can you talk a little bit about expanding the Minnesota Care buy-in and how you balance that with the needs of hospitals? I hear constantly from hospitals, especially rural hospitals, that their finances are shambles because of the pandemic, and that this would make things even worse because the reimbursements are so low.
Well, I think there's a lot of conversation that we need to have on the best path forward, and we have a lot of committee process ahead and some new members and chairs who are going to be working on that issue. But I think the fundamental principle of the Minnesota Care buy-in is that we still have people who can't afford health care in the state of Minnesota, and oftentimes those are folks who are small business owners who find that the options on the exchange are unaffordable. And so Minnesota Care buy-in is one tool that we can use to help expand and make sure that all Minnesotans have access to affordable health care. We made some really big strides in the Affordable Care Act. Minnesota Care is a nation-leading program that we have in the state of Minnesota, unique in the country. And so we really should make sure that we are letting all folks have access to that. It would also lead to a lot more stability in the Minnesota Care program. So certainly a lot more discussion to have, but it's a really important priority.
Final question.
Oh, you said that both of your majorities are united. How do you plan to stay united, and are you confident that you're going to stay united, given the slim majorities?
We're going to have lots of conversations. We've met several times already since the election, and we're going to continue to have those conversations. I have talked to the Speaker and House staff because a lot of these larger bills have moved through the House where they didn't move through the Senate the last few years, and so we are going to be partnering with them to make sure our authors know what happened in those House hearings and to truly be partners and have conversations. I've talked to our committee chairs who are talking to their House counterparts. So we're going to have just a lot of conversations to make sure we are on the same path and we're moving on the same path. But we heard Minnesotans, we listened, and so we're ready to get to work and we are going to get the job done.
Going back to the PRO Act, can you talk a little bit about why it's important to enshrine the right to reproductive rights in law, in addition to the Supreme Court having dealt with that issue?
Right. As you noted, under Minnesota law right now, because of a Minnesota Supreme Court decision in Doe versus Gomez, we have Roe-like protections on the basis of that Minnesota Supreme Court's interpretation of the Minnesota Constitution. We know that the makeup of Supreme Courts at the state and federal level change. And we think it is important to have that right enshrined in Minnesota statute, and that is the legislature's prerogative. The other thing that we think is important is to state on the record, in addition to setting forth the right in Minnesota statute for reproductive freedom and bodily autonomy, we will also note in statute that we agree that Doe versus Gomez was correctly decided, and there is a right to privacy in the Minnesota Constitution, and that protects all of us in reproductive freedoms, but also in so many other aspects of our lives.
Would you consider concurrently introducing a constitutional amendment to enshrine that very court decision in the Constitution?
I think that's personally, speaking for Melissa Hortman, the legislator, I think that's very important. We'll have conversations with our caucus and with the Senate to determine whether that's the best course of action going forward. But I personally believe that we should do it, and we should do it as soon as possible.
That's all we have time for. Thank you.
Thank you.